Hi, everyone. So, this is a very brief, from home, obviously, uh, maybe not the best angle, and very relaxed, very informal Quiz 3 review. This is for both my online folks in 226 and for my folks in Honors 2110. It's going to meet tomorrow. I'm going to be out of pocket for my face to face folks for a little while. I am going to trial to testify. I've mentioned this before as an expert witness in a voting rights case in South Carolina. I'm involved in that one and another one from Alabama that actually was before the Supreme Court earlier this morning. So it's all kind of a chaotic time. I know everybody has their own stuff going on too, and much respect to that. So maybe it's easier for all of us to hear in this hectic time approaching mid-semester that we have some online content, and not just for my online folks in 226. So with all that said, what I've done here, and you can't see my screen, is pulled up the syllabus with the schedule. And if you scroll down on the revised schedule, and you can see we did quiz 2 on, or Quiz 2 opened up on September 21. What we have since then is the How the Civil War Became a War for Emancipation lecture. And that corresponds with the Civil War chapter, obviously, in the American Yelp textbook. The Broken Promise of Reconstruction lecture, which I presented in kind of two parts, but same lecture, that corresponds with the Reconstruction lecture in the textbook. And then the Gilded Age lecture, which we didn't really finish, so obviously we only I only hold you accountable for what I got to in the video portion that I just posted for you online folks. You face-to-face folks had it yesterday. And so that will correspond with kind of parts of the Capital and Labor and parts of the Life in Industrial America lectures. Important part, obviously, beyond that is when you get to, I guess, October 5 is the relevant date, maybe for both classes, but thereabouts, where you see what's covered on Quiz 3. And we have this time 5 documents. I know that's more than our usual 4, but these are very brief. Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address is the most brief inaugural address in American history. Very straightforward. It's his second inaugural. It's in the middle of the Civil War. He knew people didn't have time for a lengthy address, and he basically said, here's what happened 4 years ago, and here's where we are. Very straightforward. And then the Mississippi Black Code I talked about in that Reconstruction lecture, so you should be familiar with that. And then we have some excerpts from the writings of Henry George, Jacob Riis, and Harry Adams. All of those are dealing with industrialization, especially in the first two, how industrialization and progress, economically speaking, industrially speaking, leaves poor working class people behind, and it's not really progress for them. And then with the education of Henry Adams, it's a little bit more of a focus on just the wonders of and the shock of electric motors for the first time. And for those of you that have watched the Gilded Age lecture, you remember I gave you a baseline definition of the Industrial Revolutions and how that means the rapid industrialization with the application of new technologies and scientific research to the process of making things, to manufacturing, the process of production, and how in the second industrial revolution in America, in this period that we're studying, the key technology is the electric motor, the ability to generate electricity, to harness that, to use that to run machines. And I mean, what they call back then the dynamo, the electric motor, that blew a lot of people's minds. And when you read that excerpt from Henry Adams, it blew his mind. And I kind of have this point there is I don't even know how to write about this, as a writer. And here's a guy who wins, I think, a Pulitzer Prize. So that's pretty cool. If we're talking about important takeaways from the lectures themselves, In the Civil War / Emancipation lecture, the biggest piece there is the Emancipation Proclamation and what did or didn't it do. I walked you through how we could definitively say the Emancipation Proclamation didn't end slavery in America, and there are a number of reasons for that I kind of line out in that lecture. Know those, and then at the same time know why then is it important, because it's still very important. And so I kind of tore it down and then built it back up. You should know both of those things about that. Otherwise, from that lecture, the most important thing I think is how Lincoln's thinking shifts and how Congress's policy shifts, and how we go from a war that was very limited in scope to begin with becomes a war of emancipation. So concepts like contraband of war, acts of Congress like the Confiscation Acts, those are important as to how we get from a war that was just about initially secession and slavery in the territories and popular sovereignty becomes a war eventually of like not just Emancipation Proclamation, free some slaves and others, but eventually one that gives us the 13th Amendment. And by the way, you got to know 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. From the Reconstruction lecture, I would say number one takeaway is be able to differentiate between presidential and congressional Reconstruction. What's the overarching difference between those two? Obviously one is lenient, one is very strict. Congress comes in and really completely changes the game. And you got to know about, what was motivating Congress in that regard. And one of those things is the Black Codes. And you're going to read the Black Code of Mississippi. I mean, we can't have that. That's what leads to the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson mentioned in oral argument for the case that I'm in Alabama literally this morning. She jumped in and said, by the way, Solicitor General of Alabama, you're making this argument about the 14th Amendment. Were you aware that that was passed specifically with the citizenship rights of former slaves in mind? So that was very, very cool to see and hear, and she's, of course, absolutely right. What else to take away from that? I would say we talked about the redemption, how it all goes wrong, how it is odd as it sounds, the Democratic Party at that time, the party and then at the South is the party of white supremacy, redeems or captures back control of those state governments in the late 1800s through violence and all other means. And you should know, what then did they put in place to discriminate against black citizens at that point? It's not black codes. You couldn't do that because you have a 14th, 15th Amendment now, and a 13th for that matter. And so what they do is they institute Jim Crow segregation, and they have these disenfranchising techniques that we talked about, from literacy tests to poll taxes to grandfather clauses. And then with the Gilded Age lecture, that base definition that I give you is important. The Industrial Revolution's rapid industrialization involving the application of new technologies and scientific research to industrial production, to manufacturing, to the making of things. And what I want you to be able to do, I think, is differentiate in terms of first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution. What are the technologies? What's the scientific research? What can we associate with the first industrial revolution versus the second? And I would say in terms of the first, it begins in England. It's because England has abundant resources in coal and iron ore. It's about the textile industry. It's about textile mills and new looms or machines and new power sources, from the water wheel to the steam engine, which is powered by coal. It's about the first wage earning work. It's about the birth of the railroad and of the telegraph. And then with the second, all of that, of course, shifts to America. And with the second, it's about the electric motor, the harnessing of electrical power and industrial production, and it's about especially scientific research in the fields of the refining of oil and the production of steel. And those are those two key industries. And I think that's where we left off. I intended to get us into a little bit of the labor movement in that lecture, but we didn't quite get there. So what we're going to do is deal with that after this. So in terms of format, it's the same as the previous two quizzes that you've had. 11 questions graded out of 10. Different formats, mix of multiple choice, fill in the blank, short written response, strict no cheating, no plagiarism policy, open book, open note. You have an hour to take it, 10-minute grace period. I don't think it's going to get opened up tonight. That was my intention, but it's probably not going to happen. So what will probably happen is that we'll post tomorrow. What I will do is leave it open through the weekend, and possibly even open through Monday, because even though it's not federally recognized, Monday is a holiday. It's Indigenous Peoples Day, formerly known as, and still officially in some places known as Columbus Day. That will be a day that we won't be doing anything, and I won't be doing anything, so I may leave it open through Monday evening. But in any case, if you have any questions, you all send me an email and let me know. Otherwise, I hope this has been informative enough, and you'll have more from me soon.